back and making sure if we need to do anything with minutes, but we also record it on YouTube so that people can watch it.
Got it.
That takes.
And the YouTube always is a little slow. Back and making sure.
So premature gabbling has occurred.
Yeah, you were just getting excited, I know.
It's the first time. He's been practicing for all virtual meetings.
I always thought it would be bigger.
Did Tina call in?
She emailed in, so she's not going to be on the call.
Okay.
We can take, so everybody knows, as a board member, if by chance, or as one of the consultants, you can be here if we need to, through Zoom, just like we did before. But we're not running Zoom with people making public comment and things like that.
Got it.
We're ready to go.
Okay, now I'll do it. Okay, so we're live. Call to order, a quick roll call. Mr. Fisher?
Here.
Mr. Nabels?
Here.
Mr. Skoukas?
Here.
Ms. or Ms. Massel?
Miss Purcell.
Okay, Ms.
Here.
Massel. Okay, perfect. Here. And we have Mr. Weaver in attendance, as well as Mr. Altieri, Mr. Neese, and Mr. LaFiata. Okay, so we're all set to go there. Let's take a moment of silence. Would someone like to lead the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. So the agenda is in front of us. We'll have public comment for agenda items only. We'll take a look at it and consider approving the minutes from the May 19th, 2021 meeting. Go into our reports, monthly and year-to-date, talk about some new business around IT security, review old business on the capital improvement plan scope, look at the asset listing, see if there's any committee comment, any public comment, and then we'll adjourn. Any questions? So public comment for agenda items only.
I think we're good.
Make sure there's no one dialing in. Okay, so may I have a motion, please, to approve the minutes from the meetings from May 19, 2021?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second?
Second.
The motion is approved to approve the minutes from the May 19, 2021 meeting. Oh, I'm sorry. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Need a review on parliamentary procedure.
It's okay.
You'll have to remind me of that every meeting.
That's
why we have this.
We'll work with it.
Now, what this is for?
You also forgot the discussion part of the minutes.
Okay. Anyway.
That's okay, because I reviewed them and there was just one whole typo that I gave to Nick, but I learned for the first time, this board is composed of 5 of us. Not everybody that was on the Zoom call. The way the minutes were written, it's like member Smith. Sherry Smith, it turns out, auditor Smith. So we made that change, but I
That's a
learned
good point.
something last night. There's 5 members and
A total of 11 people. I think 5 are members, and then there's Steve and myself, the 2 elected auditors, and then the 2 board liaisons.
go. So that's clarified for me.
All right. Let's dive into the reports.
Sure. So I hope everybody had a chance to review the reports that I sent out. I just want to make some quick highlights. Currently, revenues are up 732,000. Expenses are also up about 850,000. If you recall from the last meeting, the Board of Supervisors elected to do a capital freeze in 2020, which accounts for about 460,000 of the 850,000 in increased expenses. Although it's an expense in the general funds, that money has just moved to the capital fund. It has not been expensed at this point, so the money's just sitting in the capital fund. Some basic fund accounting. So moving on to revenues, currently set.
With staying with that, there's a residual on the increase in expenses over and above. you think that's just kind of timing, or is there a pattern? Have you looked at that?
Yeah, so the expenses are actually pretty, I don't want to say self-explanatory this month, but as I get into it, you have two big expenditures over last year. The first is your capital expenses, which I just said is about 460,000. And then your second is your debt expense. If everybody recalls, in August timeframe, we took a borrowing out for the 2020 road program. The first principal payment was due in May of this year. So that's an additional 506,000 in a debt expense. So between those two, you're looking at about $900,000 in additional expenses that we did not have last year.
Year on year, but it was budgeted for. It was just year on year comparison.
That is correct, yes.
Got it.
And now that we're talking about the debt expense, we actually just paid off our 2016 road program. So this expense is only being budgeted in the general fund for this current year. Next year, the liquid fuels dollars is going to free up because we just paid off our 2016. So this roughly $500,000 principal payment is going to be moved over to the liquid fuels fund.
Well, at
next
least a portion.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because we don't have quite that much.
Correct, yes. I believe we get about 400,000, give or take. COVID had some impact on it, so we'll see where that goes moving forward. But at least the majority of it is going to move over to the liquid fuels. So
It's ongoing.
It's always the plan.
this, yes,
Yeah,
this was, we
We
knew
knew
that
we had 1 year.
we knew that we had 1 year of overlapping debt. And just because of how favorable the interest rates were, it wouldn't have, I think.
Everybody knows what liquid fuels is, right? That is liquid fuels fund.
Why don't you, Leah, why don't you, for the record?
Thank you. It's one of those things that I
Yeah, no, completely.
So liquid fuels is the money that we get allocated from the state for our roads. It's very restricted money. We actually have a specific liquid fuels audit that, did I say next Thursday? They'll be here next Thursday. Very, very thorough. We do it very simply, but to make it simple, you can spend your money on roads and road-like infrastructure, and that is absolutely it. Roads, bridges, I know that you can get into some labor as long as they're working on the roads, but that makes your audit a lot more complicated. We choose to make things very simple, and all we do is we pay, since I've been here, Steve and I have taken out a loan, and all we do is pay the principal and interest with our liquid fuels money. So our audit is relatively simple. It's 12 checks. It's a check a month.
It's
So-
based off of the amount of roadway we have,
That's,
right?
yes.
It's based off of mileage and population.
And like I said, we usually get about $400,000. It's been going up, and then COVID hit and started taking a downward trend just because people weren't driving as much. So,
Mileage, right.
so
It's part of the tax that we experience when we go to pumps.
Right.
That's
Yeah,
part
yeah.
of where that
Yeah,
money
yeah,
comes from,
right.
so.
So moving back to revenues, that pretty much summed expenses up for this month, believe it or not. There is one other thing that I would just make note on in expenses. And if you look at the benefits line item, there's about, appears to be an $80,000 decrease. And that's just the timing of our medical insurance payment. It happened earlier in the year in 2020 than it did in 2020. That will square itself up in June. All right, so back on to revenues. Apparently, let me rephrase that. We'll start before I get into permit revenue, because last time we had an extensive conversation about permit revenue, and we need to rediscuss that. So 73% of all revenues that have been budgeted have been collected. This is right on line where we were at in previous years. I believe that we were at 70% in May of 2020. Real estate taxes saw approximately a $5,000 increase in 2020, which at first raised a little bit of concern for me because we sent about $60,000 to $65,000 more out in taxes based on growth in the township. So 5,000, you would think that we were behind collections of last year, but looking into it, a lot of the commercial properties have paid in protest in 2021. That has not been the case in 2020. I'm going to make the assumption that's happened because of the real estate reassessment. So when you take into account that, we're holding about $65,000 in real estate paid in protest. So if you add that $65,000 back, we are right on track where we were last year. The number is actually shockingly similar to where we were at. We have about 395,000 left in collections. And I believe we're at like 396,000 last year. So it is, I had to look at the report twice because I thought I was looking at the same report. It was shockingly similar. So moving on to our other taxes.
Rich, if I could.
Sure.
I guess it's early in the game, expecting all of the watching. Too early in the process to get any sense as to what's happening.
So I'm actually in a email chain with, I believe it's about 13 or 14 other finance directors across Delaware County. And I raised this question and they all said, no, we haven't had that much. And then within the next day or two, I got 13 or 14 emails saying,
They actually look.
whoa, hold on a second. And it's mostly commercial properties, which you would expect because they saw the same increase. Their increase is bigger than a residential. So, yeah.
That's interesting because if I'm correct, the proportion of taxes being paid countywide by commercial is actually down.
Well, and specifically in Newtown and
Yes.
Marble and Newtown, when the school district did the study, that's very true.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I want to say there was like a 5% shift from commercial over to
So,
Yes.
you know, my feeling amongst residential, there were winners and losers.
Right.
So that you're saying
Yes.
it's the same thing amongst commercial. Some got lower and some got higher
Some got hit very significant
increases and some got significant decreases.
Yeah.
Now for the increase, and I know I have a basic understanding of how the increases or how things are reassessed. But in those cases, it's a really unique thing, isn't it, when it comes to commercial? Because residential is fairly easy because you're going house to house to house. Commercial though, they're all over the lot.
Yeah.
So we don't know how this is going to play out.
We don't, and
I
that's
mean,
why.
we have no control.
Well, we have very little control,
Yeah.
you know, and that's why we are putting this money aside as they played it in protest, because we can't spend it with the assumption that we're going to get it.
Mhm.
So it's being tracked separately, it's, you know, all of that. And I'm not 100% sure that all of this will be solved by the end of the year. So my guess is when we go into the audit, we're going to see something on the audit showing that we have this revenue.
Almost
that's-
throw it into reserves in a way.
Yeah, it's almost going to be this question mark of whether this will be revenue or not. And I haven't talked to the auditor yet to see how we're going to totally recognize it. But, you know, hopefully we get most of it resolved and we'll have a better understanding.
And the
Do you have
60
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, there's that, if you're 65,000, that means that the county's 150,000 and the school district is $500,000 at least.
Yes, I've talked to the school district and
Yeah.
So Joe Driscoll has a little bit of a twitch right now.
Well, I mean, to that point.
We're trying to provide some entertainment
Yeah.
for them ahead of time.
Strategically, then it really seemed to me, just an observer, is the key is going to be who's going to be the lead cases, who's going to be the lead dog, because then they're going to set a precedent. And are the other townships, is everybody going to get dragged down that road? So, I mean, as the townships collectively thought about how they're going to face off on this as a group, because you get caught
The
up.
county's the big entity.
No,
Because it
the
affects
school
the-
districts are the big.
Oh, no, but I'm saying, but
Yeah.
who
In
can,
terms
you
of
know,
the
the
numbers.
bigger picture, each school district's individually, the county can attack.
Yeah, you're right, yeah.
You know?
I mean, those first cases, if it goes negative against the townships, this is going to turn into.
Yeah, especially the schools are good.
And
Drilled on
I
it.
would just like, the 65,000 is 3 commercial properties.
Yeah,
All 3 of them are on a top 10 list.
our favorite customers.
Yes. So, although I said the number is more, it's not the quantity, it's just the
Yeah.
This 65, like I said, is they are all found on the top three of our
So-
taxpayer lists.
Outside of the 65,000,
Mhm.
right? I know you guys can look at it individually. If you look at the ones that have been, quote, assessed higher, can we attach a number to what that delta is? Different than the 65 grand, because I assume there are people that are going to wind up suing us anyway, right? Or doing whatever they have to do to try to reverse it. Is there an exposure number you're putting on that, saying, okay, there's a potential for $200,000 over here that likely someone's going to try to recover?
I think it's kind of hard until we know what steps they're going to take. So we're still in the face period. So I think we're going to know better after the face period.
Yeah.
With that 390, who's doing what? Because usually that number drops pretty significantly. I think, is it usually down to about 90,000 by the end of the face period?
60 and 90.
Yeah.
So
So the exposure's not overly onerous, but there still could be a hit.
yeah, I mean, 65,000 is a little over 1%, right? So, I mean, is it going to make or break us as a township? Probably not. It may make me take a look at where we're headed in 2022. But we tend to be okay there. But I do think that it's my concern is what it means long-term. And if they do win, do we have more businesses who have gone ahead and paid, who then decide to appeal? Because that's what I can't read.
Yeah.
You know, these are just the ones that have said, we're paying in protest up front. And I understand that because they're the larger people, they're the larger folks who had larger increases.
They're effectively obligated to do
They're-
that.
You know, I mean,
Yeah,
look,
yeah.
you know, they're gonna do that. But if some of the smaller places start seeing these wins,
Right.
then they may say, well, it's worth engaging an attorney and going and doing
So,
this.
you know, the one thing, it's certainly not a reserve item, but you may want to talk to your auditors about this, just about identifying, sounds like you guys have earmarked what the downside could be for us.
Yeah.
But almost as like you're looking at it from it's a collections issue. But you almost say to yourself, look, you know, we know about the 65. There could be another, 200 out there that we may wind up losing or having reduced. Right?
Yep.
And just to have it on everybody's radar and almost track it in a way, because you're right, you don't know when those lawsuits or those filings going to show up. Is there I don't know enough about real estate law. Is there a deadline as to when they can come after this, or can this just somebody may show up in 2 years and say, well, I've been wrongly overassessed?
You could appeal at any point.
Yeah.
Your
Yeah.
assessment if you think it's wrong. I mean, people do all the time.
And I'm sure there's plenty of law firms out there drumming up business.
Oh, yeah.
And somewhere, I believe, isn't there a 12-month statute of limitations on this? Just so the counties are not.
We wouldn't necessarily, let me be clear. Somebody can't pay for 5 years and then all of a sudden appeal the entire
Okay.
last 5 years. There is
Got
a
it.
limitation there. But you could,
Every
if I
tax year.
start doing a study and I look at my house and I say, I don't think they've got my house right. I can go and appeal that and set aside the fact of the reassessment for a minute.
Mhm.
You could have done that before the reassessment at any time. People did. Their house was neglected, no longer had the same value, or whatever. They went and appealed it, and you can do that. And businesses have done the same thing. Things change. The property's no longer worth what they thought it was worth. Those kind of things. So people do that.
What's your annual?
So you
Well,
mean,
and with these new properties, that's a cottage industry.
That's your interim appeal.
and no one's ever coming to say you missed the square footage.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all one-sided, right?
Yeah.
I believe there's a statute of limitations. As you start to model this, you may want to know what that is.
There is a
What's
statute of
close.
limitations on how far back they will
Yeah.
go. I could say that I think my property's been wrong for 5 years, and I think they only go back
But you're SOL.
2
Yeah.
of those 5 years.
Yeah.
2 or 3. I have to look
Yeah,
at
my
it.
only recommendation is just to have a running tab on it, just to know it's there. Again, you don't have to cut it off and put it into reserves, but it's almost like you have to be uber aware of it, because you're right, 60 grand is not going to change your life, but 200 could.
Yeah.
And
Your
we just want to.
Those interim appeals for the new construction, whether it's commercial or residential, can be
Yeah.
filed as soon as you take possession of the property, essentially, or as soon as they come on the tax roll. You can file that every single month. Your annual appeal, as Steve was just getting at, is same thing. If you, because of, is if you've lived in that house for 5 years and you feel that you're out of whack, you can file them. I believe it's from like April to August in Delaware County, and you just have to give them a copy of an appraisal report. You have to go out and get an independent appraisal within the last year. But you know, as he said, you're not going to get your 5 years back. You're just going to get the adjustment for that year moving forward. The downside of that, though, a lot of people don't understand, is that once you open that up, if they think that you need to go up higher, you're opening up yourself to go up higher or lower or to stay the same.
Yeah.
So that's the way that it works. Because it is a cottage industry.
Yeah. Two
You
questions.
said that's how you have your car? Okay, we know where Leonard is.
Nothing in Newtown Township. I don't touch anything else.
We're still on the record. Anybody else?
Fess up.
Two questions. The 65,000, you said that's 3 commercial properties.
Yes.
Do you know what those 3 paid last year, roughly?
Off the top of my head, I do not, but I can have that information for the next meeting if you would like.
Is
I
that
think it's a percentage of what they paid, not the entire amount.
is what the 65 is?
It's the 65.
Oh,
Is that
interesting.
correct?
So are they just protesting the excess effectively?
I believe that's correct.
So this, so the 65 is that when you pay in protest, you need to keep 25% of it. So I know for a fact Dunwoody and 2 BPG properties are the 3. I don't know off the top of my head how much each one of them paid, but
It's greater than 65.
Okay.
yeah,
What are their arguments? Because I know Dunwoody's making a catastrophic loss argument because I saw that. What are the 2 that BPG's do?
they appeal every year.
Oh,
They
do?
just do it as a
They
course of business.
pay in protest almost every year. And I frequently check with the school district to see, to make sure they haven't gotten notification from the courts that it's gotten settled, and
And
so I wake Joe up every.
not in my august role as the chair of this august committee, but I know the folks at BPG, and none of that surprises me.
It's just
Yeah.
business.
It is.
Well, yeah, no, but it's business and it's the way you do business.
Yeah.
So, there's nothing wrong with saying, okay, I gotta
Nothing
check this
personal.
out, but at the same time, I heard that line in a movie somewhere. I can't remember what. But there's also a way of just doing that because that's the way you just do everything because, you want to fight everything tooth and nail, even regardless of what the.
Yeah, but they don't do all their properties.
No,
Okay.
I mean,
no.
it's
Oh,
a
so to your
specific-
point, they don't do it
it's
automatically.
a specific couple parcels
That
that
is-
is their challenge.
That is, thank you. He's correct. There's specific parcels that they challenge. It's not the whole
Got
property.
What are they doing at AmeriHealth?
I don't think so, because I don't know that AmeriHealth has even been fully, AmeriHealth hasn't had the last CO issued
Okay.
yet, so therefore AmeriHealth hasn't been valued yet.
Okay.
And then more of the properties just sold.
You don't know which ones it
Did
is?
it really?
Off the top of my head, I do
No,
not know
okay,
which
all
parcel.
right, that's fine.
They sold that. Yeah.
Search line.
Mainline Health just. sold.
Mainline Health was not owned by DBG.
Well, that's right. They had sold.
Did Mainline Health
turn again?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mainline Health has actually bought Mainline Health.
This is a perfect transition.
No, that's interesting. So, because I knew that was a one-time event a while ago, so this is a second one-time event.
Yeah.
I love,
We need these
There's
one.
a
I
lot
love
of
transactions. I mean, no, what I love private equity firms because they just like to buy and sell things.
Transaction fees.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Good.
Last question. Do you know how many properties in the township are currently under appeal? We track that?
No, but I can, I have a list. I do not know off the top of my head, and I can get all these things for you guys next time.
Going back to what Larry stated a couple hours ago when we started, he said that there's been a shift from business, the taxes paid by the business, taxes paid. But since only the businesses that are over assessed in their view are the ones that appeal, does that mean then that looking down the road that the burden is shifting even more to the property, residential property tax, or as these appeals work themselves?
I mean, potentially, right? Because an appeal does not guarantee that they're gonna win. And it doesn't guarantee that the taxes aren't gonna go up, right? I mean, so the appeal only, it's just an appeal. I always say the appeal is, I mean, normally people don't take the chance unless they think they've got a pretty good chance to win. And so we tend to lose more than we win. But I have seen, particularly on commercial properties, where they've appealed and the appeals board has actually said, we actually think you're paying too little, and they've added to that value. And so it's not, I mean, in some years, it's a wash. I mean, we have as many ups as we do downs.
So in other words, what you do is you open Pandora's box a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, look, I get it. If you think you're grossly overpaying, you know, it's probably wise. If you're kind of right on the line, you're rolling the dice as you go in, and so I don't know whether it's the day that the appeals board is hearing it, or whether, you know, there's just that many folks that are really that close where it could be more, you know. The thing is, most people try to compare themselves to their next door neighbor. And most of the time, their next door neighbor's house is not an exact match of their house. And so when they do that, they may be near square footage, but they may have a deck, they may have a barn, they may have something else that's added, and they don't take that into account. And they get in and they're looking at all of this and they say, yeah, but we've got these three things in there. Or you've pulled 3 permits in the last 5 years, and you've done this major upgrade to your house. This house hasn't had any upgrades in the last 10 years. You know, those kind of things, I think, are part of those kind of discussions.
But it may be a wash in the normal year, not the normal year because of the reassessment.
Yeah, and we just don't know that.
Right, so the question that I have is, let's assume that it goes against us. Those folks get their taxes reduced on the commercial side. Does that necessarily then mean that the residential folks of the township are going to be paying more taxes without the board of supervisors even raising?
Well, so we set taxes last year at a specific spot. So, and that was the reassessment-based new set of taxes. You know, I mean, I guess the question would be, does the board, if let's say we lose all 65,000, and, you know, let's just say the worst case scenario, and if we lose all 65,000, is there a potential that the board would make a decision to make that up? There is, you know, I mean, they may say, look, we got to at least stay zero. We can't go back. So then, yes, that would be, but that would require a specific board action to do that.
It could be more than 65,000.
Yeah,
Because you don't have the list of everything.
that's correct.
Right.
But a lot of what's being appealed that's just out there being appealed is residential, which may drive that as well. You know, which may mean that if 30 of our residents win their cases, then that's going to be spread over the remaining, I forget, 5,000 parcels that are residential.
How long does that take, the process? Over a year?
It's really slow because of, there's so many, because of they brought in extra folks right before they reset everything and did a lot of appeals that way. But it seems like it's slowed down since they've gotten that set, and they're now going back through. I can't say that's for sure, but the appearance is that it's taking long.
Any appeals to the Court of Common Pleas are taking extremely long as well. I mean, they're giving extensions out left and right because of it. And it's all because of COVID that's happening. Because once you're upset with the Board of Assessment and Appeals decision, you have an appeal right directly up to the Court of Common Pleas, and that's, they are inundated just because of the backlog. I mean, they were shut down when COVID first started, the entire court system.
Oh, so everything's been pushed back months and months.
Everything, whether it's a simple, you know, small possession to a serious murder to civil things over easements or tax appeals. I mean, it's all backed up.
Wow.
And as soon as you're about to get your trial date, someone gets COVID. So everything else off too.
So that doesn't screw up your life as a lawyer.
Not at all. Not at all.
One more question.
Sure.
You mentioned that when you pay in protest that you only pay 75%?
You pay 100%. 25% needs to be segregated in its own account.
Oh, interesting, okay.
Yes.
So,
We have the 65,000. We just
Yeah.
can't touch the 65,000 until it's settled.
so that's a process-driven thing. It's not just someone said, hey, I'm protesting, I'm gonna give you 75%. There's a way to do that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
That's a pretty good number then, 25%. If they win, are they gonna get that 25% adjustment? Maybe not.
Maybe or maybe not.
Yeah, it could be
Yeah.
less, and then you know.
Correct.
That's true, yeah, so the 25% is just there on the side.
Yeah, that sounds like it's a
Correct. They may only get a
conservative number.
10%, and then we have to give 10% back. We keep the additional
And I'm
15.
sure you've looked at what your exposure is at that 25%.
So we kind of lost the transition that I was
Yeah.
going.
But, by the way,
It was already.
have there been,
Oh, it was the greatest transition ever.
have there been any transactions recently that we could be planning on that could generate revenue for us? Is that a good setup?
There you go.
Yeah. That's why I'm here.
So
good news.
So if nobody heard, Mainline Health shifted again.
Right.
If you look at our other taxes, we're up significant, about $400,000. The Mainline Health building sold for about $395,000.
With the taxes.
Well, I'm sorry.
The
The
tax.
transfer tax was about $395,000. That's how small my mind is. The township received about $395,000 for the sale of the Mainline Health building.
And the school district get the same thing, right?
Oh, they're north of that, right?
Correct. We get a 0.5%, they get a 0.5%. I think the county gets a full percent. So the school district
Yeah.
is happy about that as well.
Sure.
So moving on, for the sake of time, like I said, we need to have the permit revenue conversation again. If everybody recalls last month, we were saying how permit revenue was down. We're not receiving the one-time permit revenue that we once received. Since then, BPG has come in and paid for their permits for the apartments in the tune of $775,000. So my spiel last time that we were actually down $500,000 in comparison to 2020. Now we're up $250,000 in comparison to 2020. Like I said, it's that one-time permit revenue. We're aware it's coming in. This is something that we use for our one-time capital purchases. Every year after the audit, we have the surplus. We take that money and we transfer it over to capital, and then we use our capital dollars for larger projects, the one-time larger projects that don't need to be built into the general fund because they don't have as much ongoing expense.
How many years now has the permit revenue exceeded the cost of operating codes enforcement? How many years has that been going on?
Probably now about 6.
Because it seems then to me that those people that are regular taxpayers in the township that are paying for permits are sort of funding these capital projects that you're talking about that are in excess of the codes enforcement budget, right? The permits should cover codes enforcement, and that's it. And then if you are collecting way more than your codes enforcement budget, then what you're asking is the taxpayer who's filing for a permit to fund other parts of the township government. And if it happened 1 year or 2 years, you would say, okay, but when you're up to 6, now you're starting to be like the company that says, you know, that's a one-time write-off and they do it every single quarter. What can we do about it?
Well, I think that the biggest challenge that we face with this is, we've gone back and we've studied what it was before. We know that roughly it's like 400 to 500,000 is a normal permit year, and that's kind of what we base everything off of. Understanding that, there's two arguments, obviously. We could make some adjustments back for this one time, put a heavier burden then on the developer at the moment. The taxpayer who does their project in 2021 then may not pay the same, would maybe pay less than the taxpayer who does their project in 2022. You know, we're trying to be consistent so that if you're doing it over time, we've not changed fees. We've not increased fees. We've kind of laid level on that. There's good arguments with what you're saying. And one of the challenges we have is last year, I really thought we were getting none of that. You know, when COVID hit, we took all of that out. You know, we subtracted it immediately. And then all of a sudden, not only did every homeowner go out and do their renovation, but all of a sudden, all the homes that we thought weren't going to be selling, the new ones, we're going like gangbusters. I mean, who thought that? I mean, we were not prepared for Lissiger project to truly be finished in 2021. They're going to be done. Everything is going to be pulled by 2021. We were thinking it was going to be.
Toll Brothers loves this town because between my development and that development, they blew them out 30-40% faster than they expected.
Oh, I know. It's just been incredible. And so that's part of, like last year was an anomaly, and I take that out and I bring back. And there is that balance. There is that question of how you do that.
So the question I have for you guys is, what's the split between commercial and residential? Like, is residential 10% of the number?
So if it's, I typically actually do new development versus.
Okay.
So we typically look at it, new development versus.
Let me take it back. Not
average
residential.
homeowner.
I mean, the two of us are going to do a permit as opposed to a developer doing a permit.
Correct.
That cut almost.
It's right this year. It's probably going to be 3-to-1
Commercial versus individual.
versus individual. 2 years ago, it was 1 to 2.
Got it. So it's variable.
It is a variable. It doesn't stay consistent.
Yeah.
And that's part of the problem. We go in each year, and Rich and I kind of estimate where we think we're going to be, and we're almost never right.
So it's you can't do. You can't,
Sorry.
So historical doesn't help you forecast.
I mean, I'm being covered.
I'm wearing my revenue hat back when I was on the business side, right?
Sure.
You try to forecast things, you have no historical perspective. It's not as though you're doing surveys to determine what the demand is going to be.
I've sat down with the developers and saying, what do you think you're going to do?
Yeah.
And they tell me what they're going to do, and we write it down, right? And we think, okay, now this is pretty good. Here's where we're going to head.
Yeah.
Well,
And Dunwoody comes in with
like
$300,000.
Dunwoody doesn't tell us they're doing anything, and Dunwoody comes in,
Okay,
and that
well,
was our big thing last year
Yeah.
that we didn't count on.
Yeah.
But had it not been for that, we would have been down 300,000.
Got
And so that's part of the challenge that we deal with these big permits, like this one for the hotel, or not the hotel, but the apartment building. It was it the kind of the end of last year that they came in and all of a sudden said they wanted to do the flip?
I think it was the beginning of 20, or maybe it was the end of 20.
It was after COVID.
Yeah.
Like we were into COVID, and they all of a sudden said, we were thinking they were going to do all the commercial first. And they've changed that. Well,
Yeah, it was after the summer, you're right.
that changed everything for us.
Sure.
And they originally said they were going to only do the apartment. And then they came back and said, well, now we're going to do the townhomes. And, it's like, it changes almost every 2 months.
So, to Alex's point, I don't disagree with where he's coming from. Saying, are we putting an onerous burden on homeowners? Again, I am discriminating homeowners against people more than a homeowner, collective
Sure.
groups. Are we discriminating against them, which I know is the wrong term, but I'll just use it as
No, I
an
think
understanding. That are they funding things that are their nickels and dimes that the bigger guys are paying tens of thousands of dollars for? And is there a way that we can reduce that burden?
Is there a liability?
Well, I can't I can't unduly charge a commercial property more for the same permit that I'm charging a residential property. You have to, you can't.
Okay, so it's a set rate regardless?
No, it's not a set rate regardless, but if I come back and I say, just because you're commercial, you have to pay twice as much.
Okay,
That's a good way to end up in court.
okay. So
Okay.
we're not in that place.
We're not in that place. So what we tend to do is we do commercial and residential based off of value of what the project is. Now, there are people that argue that that's not a good method. And, you
As long
know,
as we're consistent.
we are consistent. Now, I will say that means the person that builds a $2 million home versus the person that builds a $300,000 home is going to pay more, right? Because we do it off of value. Obviously, if a commercial project is 50 million, they're going to pay even more. So it's all based off of that. You know, I've had developers in here arguing we should charge by the toilet, you know, for plumbing. It doesn't matter whether the toilet's a $25 toilet or whether the toilet's a $100 toilet. The inspection is the same. I get that. So you could have that argument and take that argument. That I do not think has been fought in court. I mean, because there's townships that are doing it multiple ways.
Yeah.
Some do by square feet. If you do X number of square feet, here's your permit. You know, it's this value.
Yeah, like we talked about last time, it's very hard to do an apples to apples comparison
Right,
just
it's a-
because Marple's
Different
doing it one way.
methodologies.
They're right next door to us. They're in the same business, but they're doing it one way, we're doing it another, and then Willistown on the other side is doing it another way.
I think all the developers know this. They all know that our building permit fees from their project are more than it costs us to inspect their project.
And I will say when we have all this building going on, and what we have done to help bring down our cost in the codes department, is I brought on Andy about 3 years now.
I think it's more than that.
Maybe more than that. He's been here for a while. And we brought on Andy, who was an outside service. And so we still have this outside service that as the demand goes up, our costs go up. And as the demand comes down, it's a variable. And so we've done that. Now we have a flat of about 400,000 that it costs us to run the department. And then as the demand goes up, that piece goes up greater.
Throw the switch.
And we've done that. And so we throw that into the budget. We analyze that. We have an idea. And some years we're pretty close. You know, I think last year we're really close.
Yeah.
Because Andy was able to do more of the inspections in-house. But when the years that he's not, that number goes way up. I mean, we've spent as much as $300,000 or $400,000 on outside. Actually, I think 2 years ago it was over 500, 600,000. And so, you know, that's also the other piece of the challenge that's there is it varies based on all of that. And it's tied to that. And so we've tried to tie it as close to that as possible, but there is that.
Yeah, I like the answer though, that we haven't raised the permit.
Yeah, I don't think we've raised the permit fee since I've been here.
Well, that's a pretty good answer, because I mean, if you were raising the fees at the same time, then that's problematic. But by keeping them flat, you're able to say, hey, we're waiting for all this to clear out, and then we can set the fees at, you know, where we think.
The new normal.
Yeah.
I think
We're trying very hard. I mean, look, I obviously would like to give every homeowner really the best break, but at the same time, you know, the question comes, so we know that BPG is going to come in for $1 million this year, let's say. So BPG comes in for $1 million. It costs me, you know, $500,000 or $600,000 to run the department for that year with that. So do I make BPG pay for everybody? You know, what's that look like? That number, so somebody might be paying $200 to put on their deck in 2021, and they might be paying $2,000 to put their deck on in 2022. And so
Yeah, when you take that big number
we're
out.
trying to figure out how to be consistent so that we're being fair.
And let's face it, it will not be a continuous revenue stream long-term beyond
We can keep.
a couple of
Let me
years.
tell you, it's 2 years longer than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, well, that's true. Every time you say that, it keeps continuing.
It
Keep
does.
saying it.
I mean, I would love to say this is where we're gonna be forever, but we are running out of land to be developed.
Yep.
So that is, and we do have a developer in town that has some land. But if I go based off of his history, I'm not going to forecast when he's gonna do. I mean, I've been here and,
It's okay, he's gonna live to 177.
yeah, well, that's fine. I'm just saying, I don't know how to forecast off of that.
No, it's a rational thing.
And with permits, two things from my perspective. People don't understand the purpose of the permit. It's not, it's for your protection. And the builders don't encourage you to get one. Sometimes you have to say, I want a permit because I want an inspection. And then, I don't know. I think the other problem with permits, there's sometimes the perception, it's the process. It takes a long time and it slows you down. It's not the fee. I don't think
Well, and yeah, people want to hide things too. We're talking about assessments.
Yeah.
They want to hide the fact that they put a deck on their house.
Yeah.
Right, so they're.
They don't want a permit.
They want everybody to know it's there.
I mean, typically, I think our permits pretty much, like on the average homeowner, it's pretty much what it cost us to take care of that house.
That's not a bad message to get out to the community. Because to Alex's point, if you haven't raised them in 6 years, that means effectively they've gone down, there has been some degree of inflation, 10% over that period of time. And by the way, we're just doing it to cover our costs. Because people think, if people start thinking that the township's making money off the homeowner for issuing a permit, that's where people start to have a snide perspective on it. And that's not what we're trying to get across.
I will say, for the average homeowner, if you come in and pull a $2,000 permit, if I went back through and I showed you the amount of time we spent doing that, we're really pretty close to covering our costs.
Yeah, I think going off of what Larry just said there is people think of the permit itself, and it's Jim's point as well, the permit process itself is extremely onerous and they don't want to pay money to the township. But the two things or the three things that I always remind people is, as established here, the permit fees are the same no matter who you are, whether you're a multi-billion-dollar corporation or a mom and pop shop or you're living by yourself on a fixed income. Number one. Number two, the education on how the permit process actually works. People think like, okay, I dropped the permit off, I'm getting it that day. Then they get frustrated because we say we have 15 days to look at it. Don't realize that if their engineer or they miss something and they give it back to us, they think that they're going, okay, right back in the same spot. No, that clock starts over again. That's not the township's rule. That's just the way that the code itself and the law itself is written. And the third thing is, and this is sort of going a little bit further, but everyone, again, with whether it's the fee for the permit or just the way that the ordinances and all that work, it's all applied the same. So it's, it's like the big thing right now you hear about all the time is stormwater. People think that the developers are being treated one way and the property owners are getting treated different. But what they hear all the time is complaints from the property owners who say, you're making me put in a $10,000 stormwater retention system. It all gets applied the same, whether you're a big conglomerate or an individual homeowner. And talking about permits, I do know too, I don't know how much this is going to move the needle, but the school district's going to come for their permits for the fields. They went out to bid. They're going to open up their bids in August.
Mean that Jim lands a lot of memorial fields at Marple Newton High School?
Yeah.
The ones we discussed in 2011?
Yeah.
Yes.
They're getting, I
It only took 10 years
I heard you're throwing the inaugural pitch there.
from a freaking walker. To that end, it will get done someday. To that end, based on everything we talked about here, does it make sense to put something on the website around, I'm sure you have a permit section and say, hey guys, a couple things you need to know. One, we haven't raised the fees in 100,000 years. Two, we're not trying to make money off the economy. And that in effect, what you're paying in permits is really the cost of doing this. And to your point about saying, hey, you know what? You do this for a reason.
Yeah.
So for your protection and for the people who are going to work on this protection. And I think those are messages that people may not understand. Because again, everybody says, plus you got a $20,000 deck project and you're paying how much of the fee?
Yeah. I think the big key to that too, Steve, is what you said, is just talking about people. I don't think people do understand how onerous, and that's not a complaint, but how onerous the review process, and I shouldn't say onerous, how intensive and heavy the review process is, and that we do basically break even essentially in terms of man hours and man time on looking at that. Thorough is the proper word there.
Thorough is good.
Thorough.
I mean, I will say, I'm very pleased with where we are in our consistency.
Mhm.
Because for me, it's a matter of consistency. What I look for, are we doing the same for every person that comes through? Are we treating everyone?
Fair, right?
Yes, and in that, are we evaluating every project equal? And what we've done is we've taken Andy and given him that role. And at one point, we had three different people evaluating permits. And so you had three different views of where permits sat based on how they were. We've come back and I've said, I want one person, whether it's commercial, residential, and look, is it possible if Andy's on vacation that I have to bring somebody else in on a temporary basis? Yes, but on a regular basis, I've got one person and he's very consistent, he's very thorough. We get a very similar approach. Then we turned around and said, for all residential, we're going to bring in a inspector who does residential. So it's the same pretty much all the time. And that doesn't mean that somebody doesn't fill in if somebody's on vacation. We still do that. But we pretty much have that same person doing it all the time. So you have the same type of review, the same scrutiny all the way through. We've done the same thing with commercial. Have the same person doing inspections on commercial on a regular basis. And so it helps to have, by doing that, you end up with everybody pretty much under the same lens that everything's being looked at, so that everybody gets treated the same or fairly, as you say. So that nobody comes back and says, well, the township's showing favoritism here or favoritism there. We're not. We're very careful about that. In fact, Andy and I talk a lot. A lot of times he doesn't even look at the name on the permit until after he's reviewed. And just to be consistent.
LTR.
Well, actually, those things we looked at first. But anyway, we put a big red mark, double check.
So I have a hard stop at 9, so I unfortunately have to take two things. One is, I think we should look at going after more heliport business. I saw $150 in there for a heliport fee. If we can get more of those, okay, I think we're benefits.
We actually,
Do you want one in
there's
your
actually a
backyard?
permit for that.
I know it is.
Yeah.
I ride my bike by it all the time.
Yeah.
So do I literally pass the gavel?
Whoever's your vice chair will take over.
Yeah, part of my problem is I don't control all of my life. I get called to a meeting at 9, I gotta go.
I don't understand that.
The
at
meetings,
all.
the meetings at his kitchen table with his wife, he didn't think it's work. It's not work.
Well, two things. One is, A, she is chair of my company. But unfortunately, second thing is it is with the clients. But anyway, okay, so.
We are gonna, just so you know, you may want to go back and watch the video because we are gonna discuss the IT section.
Yeah, I do want to see that.
Okay, and so just.
So this is a perfect transition.
So no more heliport fees.
So I believe, Ed, you brought up the IT security question.
Yes, I don't know if there's anything we need to do prior to this in terms of acting on the minutes or the reports that were submitted.
No,
Typically, we don't have you act on the reports unless you want to make a change to them.
Nope.
And if there's no if you would not want us sending something to the board, this would be the time. Or if you wanted us to add something to go to the board, this would be the point. We haven't made you act on it.
Okay. To new business, we're going to talk about IT security. Irrelevant topic these day and age.
sure. So
You remind me
There
what
he
the
is.
genesis of this was?
Jenna?
Good morning, everyone. That's a big my head. Wow. Sorry.
So I believe at the last meeting, Ed brought up the conversation or the topic of what the township's doing to protect our IT security. So in the light of having a intelligent conversation, I can tell you what we do. So I called in our specialist, Josh, who works for Help Now, who's our third-party IT company, and he can talk way more intelligently about IT security than I could. So I'm gonna give it up to Josh.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, happy Wednesday. I think the best thing to do is just kind of go over what's in place. And then any questions you guys have, feel free to ask, and I'll be glad to answer. Looking from an inside out type format or viewpoint, the first line of protection starts with spam and phishing filtering. So in theory, the intent is that messages that appear to be phishing or spam get caught in quarantines. If they have viruses, they get held and not delivered. So that's where our first line of defense is. As we continue to move into the building, we, like every other company, we have a firewall. That firewall only allows certain inbound connections. Right now, I believe the only inbound connection is for the police department via VPN. After the firewall, we have what's called DNS filtering. So we actually look at the domain name that's being requested when someone tries to open up a link in an email or open up a web page. If that web address is malicious, or if it's been reported as malicious, it will be blocked, so the user will not be able to go to that site. Continuing inbound, we have the actual computer that people use. So every person in the world will do this, but the first thing we make sure is that patching, that Windows patching, the security and critical patches are installed in a timely fashion. We vet them first. We make sure they go through a testing cycle, because sometimes there's some huge issues, but after they're tested, we deploy them overnight, typically, except little exceptions for the police department, but overnight. We also don't use normal antivirus anymore. We use what's called endpoint detection and response, which is kind of antivirus on steroids. So what we have is it kind of includes regular antivirus, but also watches the way programs try to interact with the system. So if it sees that it's trying to write a lot of files all at once, it'll stop that process and quarantine the file. Or if it just looks like it's configured in a weird way, it'll not allow the file to run until we approve it. That's right there been a saving grace for me and for our team here, because it blocks a ton of possible malicious software. On the servers, we have the same type of patching and the same type of antivirus. But we also make sure that permissions are locked down, so we don't have the ability for a possible infection to kind of spread to everything, including files and folders that users don't have access to. So we try to reduce that attack surface. Then we get to kind of one of the most important things, which would be backup. Our backup solution is pretty cool. We do backups every 2 hours, I believe. We take a snapshot of all the data. That data is stored locally. Without getting into specifics, we keep a few hours, then a few days, and a few weeks, and everything kind of rolls up to monthlies. And then we also take that same data and transfer it offsite to the cloud. And that we can go back 12 months of monthlies to retrieve any data that we need. The cool thing about the backup device is it also acts as a what's called a virtualization server. So if there was a catastrophic event where the server were to no longer be available, we could actually spin up the server, if you will, virtually in about 2 hours. So we could continue to function as necessary. While I know this is more geared towards cybersecurity, but if there was a catastrophic event, a horrible event that, let's say, took out the entire complex, we could actually deliver that same backup solution in 2 days and virtualize everything offsite at a different location so we can continue with business. And then finally, we offer training. We've come in a few times in the past and we'll continue to do so. It's just something we offer for our clients for free, to train the employees what to look for, what not to click. Because in our opinion, the employee is the weakest link. They're the ones that can have that lapse of judgment and actually click on that link and go, oh, I think I did get an email from my voicemail system, even though I never did before, and all of a sudden run a program that could cause malicious issues. I think that about sums it up for what's in place now. I know that Dan's my salesperson, or our sales account manager, and Rich have a meeting scheduled for today or a couple days now to go over a few different items. But that's what's in place right now. Any questions?
Yeah, thank you. It's timely. Everything that you talked about, if there was a ransomware attack that shut us down, we wouldn't, based on what you're saying, I think we wouldn't have to pay the ransom, I guess. We would be able to spin up separately. We could consider those servers lost to the ransomware account and spin up something, a backup separately.
Definitely a loaded question, and I apologize for saying that. But yes, to answer your question word for word, absolutely, we would not need to pay the ransom. The reason I hesitate is nowadays it seems like in addition to the ransom, they're trying to hold the data and say, hey, we have your data here, and if you don't pay us, we're going to release it to the world. Luckily for a municipality, it's all kind of public knowledge, so I don't know if that would be a problem. But to answer your question specifically, you are correct. We would not need to pay a ransom.
Great.
And I will mention, just talking about that, we purposely made some decisions not to maintain certain records on our server. Like we don't maintain employees' social security numbers. We don't maintain people's credit card information here. All of that's done through a third party who has a much better way of backing all of that up, protecting all of that. It takes the risk off of us tremendously. And we've done that purposely because of past history. We've made sure that we're protected.
To the presentation, thank you. The one
Sure.
thing I have is, you have a pattern where a particular employee has a routine where they contact digitally with someone else, say somebody in the county, just to pick on media or whatever, and somehow or other that becomes the vehicle for the infiltration. Is there a mechanism in place that can detect where there's an anomaly in that communication? There's something that's not the pattern.
Not as of today. First of all, I don't know what would be put in place to detect that anomaly. Let me rephrase that. Actually, there are a few things in place. So if all of a sudden emails start to appear suspicious or they come from a different location, let's say Rich is communicating with the county, to use your example, and all of a sudden the county's email is compromised and it looks like the email is being sent from a different location. The spam service, the phishing service should most likely intercept that.
I will tell you, the spam service does not allow me to get a county email today.
It works.
That's good.
I have to go into my junk file and move it into, I mean, that is every day.
Yeah, I think people are
process.
sensitized that they don't know who the sender is. It's more to the routine and someone piggybacks the routine.
So it's funny. It's actually kind of, so we do lately and always, we've done a lot of these kind of interviews, either inside or remotely, about this. And it's funny when I get to hear someone who basically knows that routine and employees are the weakest link. To answer your question, just direct, it's very difficult, because if it's email, using your example, if it's email, there's really little security risk. So if I'm going back and forth with someone at the county and all of a sudden the county's email is compromised, and that attacker has access to the county's email and starts sending emails saying, hey, go buy me Apple gift cards and send them to this address, there's nothing malicious to detect. The emails, in theory, encrypted-ish. It's difficult to read the email and flow through it, especially if there's no keywords that'll spawn some kind of response. And that's why we fall back to employee training. And we kind of say, hey, it has to ride on, basically, employees can't be complacent. They can't fall into that routine of not checking every email. Just because it says it's from Steve, just because it says it's from Josh at Help Now, you should look through that email and say, hold on, why is Josh all of a sudden asking me for the security code to our bank? he's never done that before. Let me pick up the phone and call him versus responding to this email. Now, with that said, there are systems in place to detect anomalies within Microsoft Windows, within the firewall. And that's one of the things that our sales guy is going to be talking, or our account manager, excuse me, is going to be talking to Rich about later today or tomorrow. Hopefully that answers your question.
So how much is this compensation?
Yeah, right.
Well, the phone call with Dan's free, luckily. So, but we should probably pay you for that. Now, some of the things that we're going to recommend don't cost anything. Some cost, $1 million a day, which is going to pay for my kids' college in a few years. I'll still owe a little bit probably though. Sorry. Sure.
Any other questions from the board or anyone else?
That was very.
No. And if I can just say one thing, and I apologize, I'm very wordy, as Steve and Rich will tell you. It's definitely a scary environment we live in now. We have a client, and I'm very open and honest. We have a client who got compromised and almost lost $96,000. And we have all the same levels of protection that you guys have. But what they did is they were able to steal the payroll person's email address. They have external email hosting. So what happened never actually hit any of the protection mechanisms in place. So that's why we have to constantly train and kind of beat it into everybody's head to check every single email and every single link before clicking on it. Just to kind of beat that horse, I guess.
And I would like to say, I believe it was, Josh, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was last year, maybe 2 years ago, we sent out a phishing email on purpose.
Yes.
And I believe that we only had 2 or 3 individuals click on it. I will not name names.
Yeah, but that's too many.
Yeah.
Well,
Thankfully,
the
it wasn't
surprise
one of
one
you,
is the
right?
one that was really a shocker.
Yeah.
One of the people that clicked on it should have known that.
Yeah,
You need sometimes.
it wasn't me, if that's very
Take these lessons home with you.
So yeah, that's why we do really have help now come in at minimum once a year and do some employee training, just because, as Josh says, it's the weakest link. You can have everything in place. If somebody lets them in, there's something we can do about it.
And just for you guys to know, Dan will tell you later on, we're also doing on-demand training now. So you guys can listen to Dan and I bicker about, phishing topics as often as you want. Sorry. It's like a comedy show when Dan and I teach training.
It's definitely a comedy show when you both show up at the same time.
Right? It really is.
But does anybody have any other questions?
for Josh?
We're good.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you,
Josh,
Josh.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Josh.
And if anybody has any questions, Rich and or Steve, give my email address. Please reach out. I have no problem responding.
Super.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, everybody, have a great day. I'm going to disconnect because I really don't know what you guys are talking about. Have a great day, everybody.
Know what you were talking about, so.
It's a word.
Have a great day, guys.
You too.
Bye. I don't know how to do this. Oh, here we go.
Yeah, I'm questioning on time here.
Yeah, so I just would note one other thing. I think everybody here is aware that we did have a ransom attack. 5 years ago.
When were you in Scotland?
Yeah, whenever I was in Finland.
I didn't know. I'm sorry.
It was
So
perfect.
we
It was
did have a
perfect
ransom
timing.
attack, and there's no phone call that I hated worse while I was on vacation, let me just tell you.
It was Memorial Day.
It was Memorial Day. And fortunately, I just want to say, fortunately, our staff responded exactly as they needed to. They immediately took the steps that were necessary. Fortunately, our relationship with the FBI allowed us to have the FBI, the FBI was here that day on Memorial Day, looking into the situation. And so, my comments are, we brought in help now after that because we realized that there were some holes that needed to be fixed. And they've done a great job of doing that. I have a lot of confidence in Help Now, I've been using, I used Help Now for about 8 years in Phoenixville before I came here. But I do want to say this, what we're aware of is that it doesn't preclude something from happening. It's just that we now have a much better system in place so that if it does happen, we, like you said, we could be down 2 hours or 2 days, not weeks and weeks and weeks. I think it was almost a month and a half.
Yeah, to get back to normal. That's a phone call that I'll never forget. I was heading to my aunt's for a picnic, and my phone keeps ringing from this weird number, and I pick it up. This is Agent so-and-so with the FBI. What's your cyber insurance look like? I'm like, oh, no.
So first of all, my question
Yeah.
is your electric company.
If it wasn't coming from the police chief, I would have thought it was a prank call, but
I had no idea about that. So my question was, I was thinking about Colonial Pipeline more recently. I had no idea the township.
Actually, it's interesting because townships are hit with a very high frequency.
Yes.
It's really unnerving. And partly because most townships have very poor,
Greasy.
things in place to keep that from happening. And so we think we understand where it came in. We've done a lot of research. Fortunately enough, a year before that, the insurance option for cyber came across my desk, and I said, we really need this. And then I said,
best $1,500 we ever
best
spent.
$1,500 we ever spent, literally. And I mean,
Also, that premium's gone up.
actually not a lot.
Really?
And,
Yeah, you just gotta meet the standard.
and,
Oh, yeah.
and partly because we've taken all the steps we
Yeah.
have to make the changes. And, and we talk about it regularly. So this is, we take it seriously. And there's a reason why we don't do certain things, why we don't store certain data. And the good news is we didn't store that data before. And, I'd always said, if I can do it another way, I shouldn't do it here on out.
The credit card data was huge. That was what they were number one concerned about, is if they got in, do you guys take credit card payments? The answer was yes, but we don't store it here. It's encrypted at a third-party site. So that bypassed the whole step that we needed to take to get back up and running.
And all of our payroll is done third party as well. For that very reason, so that we, I could probably do payroll cheaper bringing in in-house, but I have less risk by doing it the way we do it. Somebody else is taking that hit for us.
In the interest that we're past our time lot, unless there's objection from the group, I think we should table the discussion on the capital assets since we beat up revenue and permits today. And
Sure.
May I suggest that, and I know Jim's not here to suggest it after he's gone, maybe or on my part, but since we got to that part here, I might suggest that you put together a side committee of 2 who would help kind of get us through, kind of talk through some of those things. I know Lisa has said that she has some experience in this area, obviously in her role as being an auditor for lots of municipalities. And so if you would be interested in doing that and willing to do that, it might help as we are preparing the capital budget for 2022 now. This is something we're working on kind of as we speak. We're starting to do some research and looking at where we're headed. And so if we want to look at what this looks like as to what should be included in this times, I would just wonder.
that'd be a good idea.
So
I would be willing to volunteer, Lisa, if you want to collaborate with me.
Sure, okay.
I think it would expedite rather than doing this in a group where it's going to be.
well, and then it could be a report back
Right.
versus so much of.
People can look at it
being a
in
work session.
advance of the meeting and come in with specific questions. we can
Yes.
get through.
If that's okay with everyone,
Yeah,
that's
I
my
like that
suggestion.
Good idea.
Yeah, and I do have thoughts already, and I can send you what I've been thinking about.
So if that works,
Yeah, one of the things, just to take it through, one of the things we'll need to think about is almost going to need to have a background as to what currently exists,
Yeah,
and then get to, these are suggested paths as to how we want to proceed.
And I'll be more than happy to supply you guys.
So maybe we'll do an hour with you, maybe we'll do a working lunch.
Yep, absolutely.
I like this report a lot better than the last one,
Yeah,
this fixed asset report.
okay.
So,
I believe I fiddled with it based on some suggestions that came up at the last meeting. Hope it turned out a bit clearer than the last one. And that's good to know that an auditor likes that, because I gave him another one.
We got another auditor to make it.
Yeah. So I gave him the
I'm
old
going to
report
move
this year,
along
so.
here. Are there any other comments from the committee on any other topics that need to be raised? I see none. Are there any comments from the public?
There's none here, so.
None here. Okay. Oh, they're not dialed. Okay.
So we are only taking comment if somebody's in the room.
Okay, so they're not going to be able to
Because it's
remote.
too hard for us to monitor
Got it.
everything and do that, particularly if we're sitting here and not sitting at the computer.
Perfect. Okay, so then I will blessedly call for an adjournment of the meeting at 9:21.
Thank you.
okay.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And you're at 7.
yes.
We know when we're on.